everyone. My name is Bas Robben, and I'm going to talk to you today about the fat that is on our lips and not about the fat that is on our hips. In other words, I'm going to talk to you about the function of fat in cooking and how we can use it in a better way. And I hope that after my talk you will have a little bit better understanding of how to use fat in your daily cooking. I am a cookbook writer, and I worked as a culinary editor for Dutch Food magazine, and I worked as a recipe developer, and that's how I got most of my food knowledge. I just published my second book, which is all about the fats, hence I'm here. Fat is very interesting because you can find it in any culture, and I think tonight here we have a lot of different cultures, which will also define what kind of fat you are using in your cooking. So I would like to know what it's you.
Me?
Yeah.
Luis.
Yeah. So you use a lot of olive oil?
Yeah.
Do you also use animal fats?
Not so much.
But are there certain parts in the country that they will use more animal fats?
Yeah, mostly in the mountains they would use a lot of animal fat.
Yeah. And that's very typical because in places where food is scarce, and it can be because of the region or because of poverty, fat is being very much sacred. Like it will make sure that you are able to reach the next day as a hunter. So even though we are shying away from the fatty parts of the animal, they are the cheapest parts in our supermarket. But in poorer countries or places where it's difficult to forage food, the fat is being sacred, like it's the prized part of the animal. And that is how I got to come to the subject of fat. I was on the east coast of Taiwan in Hualien, and my partner, he took me to a restaurant where they served this dish. Does anyone have any idea what it is? It's about this one. Anyone? No, not you! Sit down, Mariah.
Ramen.
No, it's not round, but it's a little bit similar. This is a deep fried pork rib soup. So you can see like the browning of the meat, and that is what makes the soup so very interesting. Because if you brown something, it can be roasted in the oven, but even better so by deep frying, you get the browning reaction over all the surface area of the meat. It's called the Maillard reaction. And it's the chemical reaction of browning the food that makes it so incredibly tasty. It is a reaction between amino acids and reducing sugars. And that's also why if you hear a TV chef talk about caramelizing onions, they're not talking about adding sugar to your onions. They're talking about browning your onions until the point that all the sugars start to caramelize. So this soup was one example of why I thought fat would be a very interesting topic to write and speak about. So I transformed it into this one. I spruced it up a little bit. Fat can have three roles in cooking. It can be a main ingredient, a cooking medium, and as a flavoring. As a main ingredient, for example, you see two pastries here. On the left one is a Queen Amand. You can find it in most of the hipster coffee places nowadays. Yeah, it's a very Instagrammable pastry. And on the right you see a very Dutch typical cookie. It's called Utrechtse Spits, or in the Utrechtse Spits you will cover in chocolate only. And the left one, you can see all the different layers. And that's because of the fat. It's a laminated dough, which means that the baker, or the pastry chef who made it, he made a slab of dough and he put a slab of butter on top. And then he starts to fold it and roll it. And he does this a lot of times. And he has to chill it in between. But because of the layers, I'm going to put my hands down, the fat will create a barrier between the different doughs. So what happens is it will start to rise like this. And the fat prevents the two dough layers of sticking. That's why it becomes so fluffy. That's why croissant is also very fluffy. And on the right you see the spritz. And this is also a very fatty cookie dough. And that has to do with the type of dough it is. In order to make the cookie, you have to grind or push the butter until it's like a very silken consistency, almost like the point that it's like a moisturizer for your face, that kind of cream consistency. And at that point, Yeah, so it's like a very good therapy for your hands because you have to do it by hand. It's about the body mark. And at that point, you add the rest of the ingredients, so the flour and the sugar. And because it's so fatty, the protein in there, the gluten, doesn't really develop. And that's what makes the cookie so very crumbly. And I will talk about that a little bit later. So fat as a main ingredient is to enrich the flavor, but even more so to give texture to food. Fat is also used as a cooking medium. I mean, every time we put something in our pan, it depends on what I am cooking. If I put olive oil or a neutral oil or butter in a pan, we use it to transfer the heat into an ingredient. Because if you just put something in a pan with no oil or less oil, it will burn very easily. And depending on the quality of your pan, it will distribute the heat unevenly. And two other ways that you can use the fat as a cooking medium is in a confit, which is the French word for cooking something most of the times in fat on a low temperature. So this is a confit duck legs around 70 degrees. And this one is deep fried, of course, which I think we know best. So the cooking medium is to transfer the heat into an ingredient. And then we can use it as a flavoring, because fat has the amazing property that it can conserve and absorb all different kinds of flavors. And it will stay in there, and you can use it to finish a dish. I mean, it's not for the last 30 years. They started to put olive oil on everything in Italy. That's quite a recent development. But it is for a reason, because it does give a very nice, fresh flavor to the food. And these are two Taiwanese examples. I think Ning will be excited. This is a Drunken Chicken, which I'm not sure if is it Taiwanese dish, per se? Of course, okay.
No, from Shanghai.
From Shanghai. Okay, hold on. So yeah, this is chicken marinated in alcohol in rice wine, where this one is dry sherry with walnuts, and put a spring onion oil on there. And this is like an oil you can just make, and you can put it on whatever you want if you feel it needs something fresh. And on the right you see, in Taiwan you have very different kinds of steamed rice with some kind of animal fat inside. And this is one from Kaohsiung. It's the duck fat rice. So what they do is they render down the fat from a duck leg. They keep the fat separately, and then they stew the rest of the meat. And then they add a ladle full of the fat through the rice, which is very, very tasty. And throughout whole Taiwan you can taste different kinds of fat. There's one version with pork, one version with chicken, one version with turkey. It depends on the time you're in. So fat as a flavoring to a dish. There are the fats you can see in two main groups. There are the saturated fats and the unsaturated fats. And on the left you can see it's like the plant-based oils. Unsaturated fats tend to always be liquid at room temperature. That's also why we call them oils. The saturated fats are solid at room temperature. And as you can see, they are all animal-based, except for the coconut fat. And just because of this property, like one is liquid and one is solid, you can use it in your cooking. So for saturated fats, this is a dish, it's called rillette. It's a French dish, which is kind of like a pate. So you use animal fat, which will be solid at room temperature. So after it cools down, you can smear it on your bread. You're not able to do that if you're using olive oil. That's it. And also, if you're making ice cream, as long as you make sure that your ice cream mixture is fatty enough, you will not need an ice cream machine to churn it. And the ice cream machine churning we do because of the ice crystals that will form if you don't mix it while it's freezing. But as long as it's very fatty, those crystals are not big enough to be notified. So that's a very good cheats way to make ice cream. And you can even whip it up afterwards to make it into like a soft serve or soft ice. The unsaturated fats are very ideal for infusing. For example, when you're using it in a chili oil, but you could even go as far as turning it into a cocktail. It mixes very well, especially when you add something sour, some acid. So there are some advantages and disadvantages. I'm just going to do the main one that you thought when you saw that I was going to talk about fat today, the healthy part. Yes, it's true that we are supposed to eat more unsaturated fats than saturated fats, so more oils. And yeah, that's just true. There's nothing you can do about it. It's not about the calorie intake, because that's just the same, but it's about your arteries, so it's about your cholesterol. But there are some signs that some saturated fats can also lower your cholesterol, but it's for like very little. Most of them are not, so you should use those sparsely. And as you can see, the unsaturated fats have some other benefits as well. There are much more upsides to that side. But still, I feel like the right side is more interesting because of the rich flavor it gives. This is the butter. I mean, come on. Yeah. If you can have butter on bread in a restaurant, you have to dip it in olive oil. I'd rather choose the butter. So then, I would like to answer 5 questions for you because in my book I didn't divide it in starter, main course, and dessert. I thought, oh, let's do it differently and talk about the different cooking techniques that fat has. Like for zuur, I thought about cooking techniques with zuur, like making your own mascarpone, making your own ricotta, where you use the acids to denaturalize the protein in there, so you can set it, but also for making ceviche, like a raw fish dish, that you cure the fish in the acid. So I also use that technique for fat. So I'm going to tell you about the deep frying, the confit, and the infusing, and the conserving, and the baking. The deep frying, what makes a potato fry crispy? Does anyone make any potato fries at home? Yeah. And I'm not talking about those fake ones that you do in the oven. I know somebody who's making sweet potato fries in the oven.
This one.
Really? They don't get crispy, come on.
No, but wait, how you make it crispy?
If you put it
You can't, it's a root.
it becomes crispy.
It's not really a potato, so you can't really.
Yeah, I know that.
Yeah. You really have to deep fry, you have to cover it in starch.
There is a myth you have to fry it twice.
Okay, well, we'll see. But how does someone else make normal fries at home? Like, what's the typical way? Yeah?
I mean, I'm usually try it twice.
You fry twice. First you do it at a lower temperature and then a
So
higher
if
one.
if you want to make it really crispy, you fry it twice, or you basically dehydrate it.
You dehydrate.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you are lazy, just make some ready-made.
Yeah. What people think of as a soggy chip, it doesn't actually have to do with a fry absorbing that much oil. It has to do with the residual moisture, so the moisture that's left inside a chip. I say chip or fry, I use them interchangeably. So the typical Dutch way, it's the common way, I think. First you cut the potato, you wash it to get rid of the excess starch, and then you fry it first at 160 degrees, then you let it cool a little bit, and then you fry it until it's crispy at 180 degrees. But that's kind of like a labor-intensive way, because you have to scoop it out and then mold, it's a hassle. Then there's also the lazy way, which is the way I do it, where you just cut the potatoes, you get rid of the starch, you dry them very well, and then you put them in cold, neutral oil, so sunflower oil or refined peanut oil, and then you just put it on the heat, and then you don't do anything. Yeah, you just turn it once to make sure it doesn't stick to the bottom, but as the oil heats up, the potato will also cook, and at a certain point it will start to fry, and at a certain point it will be deliciously and golden brown. And the best way to do it, because of the residual heat, is to really dry out the potato. I mean, that's what you want. That's what makes something crispy. Crispy is the combination of dry and fat. And you do that by first really cooking the potato to the point that it's almost falling apart, and you get a lot of cracks in the potato. And then you fry it 2 times to make it very, very crispy. And in between, you have to dry it for 4 hours on a rack in your fridge, which is, it's like a professional chip. Yeah. I mean, I did it once at my final day at my internship, and they were still talking about it. I was an intern, so I could spend all day. They didn't really care. Then the confit. I wanted to tell you about what fats you would use for confit, because confit is something very, very interesting, and it gives a lot of flavor, and you get a lot from it. By submerging something like duck. Yeah, thanks. by submerging something in an animal fat for a long time, the animal fat will absorb all the flavors, but it's also giving flavor to whatever you're cooking. So normally you would use that for duck legs, you use the duck fat. If you're using pork shoulder, you're using the pork fat, but you can mix them, it's fine. Like all the saturated fats you can change fairly easily because they have the same kind of saturated fat content. And the way to go is always low and slow, that's comfy. It doesn't really matter if you're using meat or you're using a veggie, you just want to take a very long time and it will all be very delicious after a long time. Then for the infusing, what makes a great infusion? Actually, you're using the same way. You have to do it low and slow. We don't need to do everything very quickly. If you're using a herb, first you need to blanch the herb, so the herb will stay green after you puree it in your oil. And if you're doing spices, first you have to fry the spices to make them bloom. And the infusing is something I do a lot at home because you can just add it to whatever dish that you are making. So, for example, if I make a coffee oil, which is really as simple as putting coffee and oil together in a jar, and then I let it sit in the low oven, so like 60, 70 degrees in a glass jar. And then it's a nice temperature to extract the flavors from the coffee, but it can also be something else, of course. And then afterwards, you can just put it on whatever. And as long as you use neutral oil, it will last for a long time. Because oils are very different from fats, because the oils tend to last longer. They are less subject to going rancid. So if you're using fat as a conserving method, yes, you can use animal fats like butter or the lard, but at one point they will go rancid. And rancid is the oxidation process of the fat, and it will just taste off. Like actually the product that you store in the fat is not off because it's being protected from the air, but the fat itself is going off. And if you're using oils, it will stay for a much longer time. So if you're making a confit garlic, for example, as long as it's covered in the olive oil or whatever you use, it will stay good. And that also counts for the infusing. It will stay good for a very long time. Yeah, that was my story about the conserving. So it's the also you can see in this little jar, like there's very little space for oxygen, and oxygen is what makes the fat go bad. So you want as least oxygen in there as possible. Now, for baking, why does fat make cookies crunchy? You saw the other cookie earlier, which was a spritz using butter. Well, this is actually an olive oil cookie. And on the right you can see, maybe you think it's a crumble, but it's not. It's actually the dough. By using olive oil, which is a liquid, in a dough, it will never get like the texture of a cookie. Like you can't really roll it out, or you can't really form it with a thingy like a cup to take it out. You have to shape it with your hands. And the fat makes cookies crunchy because it forms the layer around the molecule of the wheat, of the protein, preventing it from sticking to another one. So as long as you don't overmix the mixture, it will make for a very crunchy result. And if you want even crunchier, you can use something like, it's called Zeeuwse which is a low protein flour. You can also find it in Chinese supermarkets. It's not called Zeeuwse then, but it's called protein flour. But I know like Zeeuwse is very difficult to find in a lot of places. But you can find it in Toko as well. And because of the low gluten content, it will create a much crispier result. Gluten is what you see in bread, like it makes it bouncy, it makes it maybe a little bit sticky, elastic. And it does that to trap the air, so it's like a network inside the bread with the air bubbles. And the gluten is making sure that the yeast that produces the air will stay inside. And you don't want that in a cookie. I mean, I know Americans like chewy cookies, but I can't deal with that. No. So, and on this note, I would like to end. I don't believe in low-fat cooking. Woo!